for inviting us and
Thank you.
inviting me and us.
Thank you. Yeah,
Um,
indeed.
I wish I were there. I've had lots of good visits to Risala, and I miss everybody there. I met some wonderful people, and I guess Craig, you're in Houston as well, so you guys are all kind of local.
Yep.
Um, yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting book to read. I think that like a lot of the material in it, Muslims have sort of come like a Muslim would have come across. Um, and I kind of was what I was thinking about most when I was reading the book was how I would be reacting if I didn't know this stuff or if I was just from a random American background. And it was I just I was left with so many questions. I mean, I really kind of wanted more to know about your experiences in life, like what's it like being Craig Considine, more than I was like. I mean, I'm not. I don't know. This is going to sound bad. It's not that I wasn't interested in the book. I just got way more interested in what it was like for you to kind of to navigate the audience that you seem to be talking to. Um, and then I was thinking about your background. You mentioned you're for it's you're from Irish and Italian descent, and you end up doing your PhD in Dublin. Was there like some connection there? Do you have strong sense of family roots? Was it just because it was you liked the law, the Guinness or something? I don't know why.
Well, I mean, family roots were so much for me when I was growing up in Needham, Massachusetts, on both sides, the Italian and the Irish. The Irish side was really kind of obviously the name, right? So the name Considine is from a place, a very, very small place called Lisdoonvarna in County Clare by the cliffs of Moher. And, pretty humble place even to this day. And my father always instilled in me this kind of understanding, or a passion even, and a desire to kind of be in touch with that land, the history that comes with that land. 800 years essentially of British rule for more or less. So when I actually decided to make the jump to Trinity College in Dublin, those things were definitely motivating me. But I also had kind of more traditional academic reasons as well. I was hoping to study two different diasporic communities, one in the United States and then one in Europe. And then, of course, Trinity is a kind of historic university too. And my dad always kind of spoke very, very highly of it. And then, I guess I was lucky to get in. So yeah, Jonathan, like when I think about the work that I've been doing and the work that I want to do and the type of relationships that I want to build with people, it is informed by Irish history. When the Irish came here to the United States, when I say Irish, I mean Irish Catholics. It was a rough go. My family actually came much later. We weren't part of the Irish famine crowd. But the colonization of Ireland was very eye-opening to me when I went to Ireland. I did not know about how deeply rooted that is. And I also didn't know about how passionate the Irish are for the Palestinian cause as well. But living there really gave me a different perspective on the type of work I do, because so much of Ireland is informed by colonization, blatant racism, ethnocentrism, notions of religious superiority. So I don't know, maybe God has given me a task to kind of live through these family roots in a way. I believe that. I deeply I feel that spiritually. Like it's just part of who I am.
I mean, I think that if you're one, maybe one could imagine that an American Christian could respond to Muslims in the U.S. in two ways. Sort of one would be like a kind of nativist sense of majoritarian outrage and fear at a newcomer, whereas someone who maybe comes from more your perspective, which seems to be linked to like the Irish Catholic experience is, to see them as another, like another group of Irish people basically who need to be understood and embraced and communicated with. And yeah, so that's really that's really interesting. I mean, I was guessing that there was a connection, but I'm glad that I was not just fishing. I mean, and then something else I noticed that I read a little bit of your first book. I guess it was your first book, the Routledge one about the Pakistani diaspora, which was really interesting. And I mean, it was like, what was it like to? I mean, I know anthropologists and sociologists are, their bread and butter is to kind of engage with someone who's very different from them a lot of the time, right? And sort of try and like have this emic experience of almost like living through that person's perspective. But was it hard? Was it hard to? I mean, I'm Muslim, and I've been Muslim for like 20 years. I still sometimes meet people, and I'm just like, I have no idea. So you're just from a completely different universe than me, So you were interviewing like Salafi Pakistanis in Dublin or something, and people who are on like some like episode 2 or 3 of some kind of insane life experience they were going through. Yeah. And what was that like? I mean, how did you get to, how were you able to communicate with these people and relate to them?
Well, let me say first about some of the more, I don't know what the right word would be. Yeah, Salafi, I guess. So there is a masjid in Dublin that was close to where I was living at the time. And like a year before I got there, the WikiLeaks wires were released. So this was like 2010. And this had something to do with Assange, I think, but like these WikiLeaks wires come out, and it is noted that this one masjid was kind of under surveillance and so on and so forth. So I walk into this community. I had a gatekeeper, Professor Ahmed, kind of connected me with people here and there, not with the imam there, but with someone affiliated. So I go in, and it's very, very difficult to break the ice. It's not necessarily not being Muslim. It's like not even being Irish. Like I'm coming out of nowhere. I speak like an American, and I think people were reserved. So to make challenges even more complicated, about a couple months before I actually entered into this space, there was another man who fit my profile, but he was a native of Ireland, and he was hanging out at the mosque for 2 to 3 weeks, and then he ends up converting and then disappears. And this community actually thought that this was part of this wider WikiLeaks thing. So I had to deal with that level of suspicion. And obviously I'm not one to question why people are suspicious of me. Like with these big things going on, I mean, I can understand. But in Dublin, I was very lucky to meet a wonderful family who really took me in, a Sufi Barelvi, South Asian kind of feel that you may find in some of the northern cities in Britain. The US, navigating these spaces in Boston, which is where I did the other part of the study, was a little bit easier for sure, because many of the people that I actually interacted with were people that grew up here just like me. So in this sense, we're all American. We have similar interests and hobbies. And then, of course, I mean, there's so many layers to this. But I think generally speaking, it was a positive experience, and I'm really grateful for it. These people don't have to open their doors to people like me at all. So I'm thankful.
The book, your most recent book was, I mean, your talk about the Prophet Muhammad, so I mean, it makes sense why, that's the focal point of your discussion. But one thing I thought was, when I was reading it, say there's sort of like there's 2 ways that a non-Muslim can sort of approach Islam, right? One would be to look at the Quran, and one would be to look at the Prophet's life, right? So these are two kind of doors you can go into, and obviously, they're connected and everything. But what occurred to me, was, and let me preface this by saying, a lot of times you'll hear Muslims say, Islam is great, but Muslims are terrible, and we're embarrassed by our, there's all sort of Muslims, like, there's self-flagellation and stuff like that, and some of it's deserved and a lot of it's not deserved. So I don't want to kind of do the self-flagellation thing. And I mean, let's just say that Muslims, there's a lot of great things about them, there's a lot of not great things about them, right? But what is it? Is it a different kind of, how would you use your experience with Muslims to talk to non-Muslims about, or Christians about, to improve their understanding of Islam? Would you have a very different approach? Would you want to take that route, or would you rather stick to like scripture in effect?
I mean, I think naturally, as a sociologist, the best thing to do is to give people examples of my own lived experience, to try to give it a bit more of a real feel, So I'll give you an example. Like, I was at a church, it's in Kingwood in Texas. I probably not going to name the church, but it's in Kingwood. So for Houston folks, where it is, kind of conservative. And I was giving a talk on Islamophobia and ISIS, two sides of the same coin. And there was about 100 people there. And right as I started, in the back of the room, a man stands up and he starts barking about Sharia, talking about Sharia no-go zones and all these things. And, I just asked him, like, where did you hear that? And it was like the media. And I asked him, I'm like, have you ever been to a mosque? And he said no. And then I said, okay, I actually want to give you a few experiences that I've had. And the experiences that I used, I forget what they were precisely, but they were largely around like hospitality and actually making friendships and actually creating real bonds that I've lived. It's one of these things, like, we're not just speaking nice things about Muslims in order to build the bridge. That's important, but when we have real human connections, I think that is a lot more powerful. So when I try to navigate these spaces, I really actually don't try to talk too much about heavy stuff, like the Quran and the Hadith. I mean, most of these people have no idea what these terms even mean, So for me, why would I jump right into these really complicated things? I mean, some people may not think they're complicated, but So I'm trying as much as possible to, and I don't want people to take this the wrong way, but to dumb it down in a way. I often say with interfaith events, like, people are like, what's the best way to engage in proper interfaith dialogue? And I say, well, the best way to start is by not talking about religion at all, and actually just talking about what it's like to be a dad, a mom, a son, a daughter, a professional, a colleague, a citizen of the United States, like things that can kind of bring us back down to the roots, what all human beings experience. So I try to do that, and it doesn't always succeed. And then, obviously supplement that with the heavier, backing it up with examples from the Quran or the Hadith.
So I mean, I imagine that I think you start the book by, if I remember correctly, by talking about kind of being in you were in high school when 9/11 happened, and like you're recalling being in that American legal systems class or something, and
That's exactly
kind
it, yeah.
The stuff you heard, people starting to say in the hallway and everything. I mean, how do you? And then in one of your other books, you talk about the San Bernardino shooters. I mean, I can only imagine that one of the first things your audiences, often kind of non-Muslim audiences, say is, well, how do you explain these guys? These 9/11 and all these shooters or whatever. And so, I mean, do you just like, how do you kind of handle those questions, or how do you address those kind of questions?
Well, I think it's easy for people to fall into the kind of trap of actually saying, well, this is also true of Christians. Like, Christians do these things as well. I mean, I think I used to do that a bit more. Someone brings up, yes, San Bernardino, like, they don't represent, a quarter of the world's population, and they don't represent Muslim majority countries. I mean, fair enough. And you would say the kind of same thing with like Dylan Roof. Like, Dylan Roof is not representing Christianity or people in the South. But I there's various issues that I would raise. I think there's not kind of one single approach, but I would bring up political issues, things that fall outside of, theology or the Quran. What radicalizes individuals? I mean, that's a really deeply complex issue, and it's certainly not as simple as saying, well, there's a verse in the Quran or the Bible that justifies this. I mean, that's pretty, that's just inadequate. That's an inadequate description. So, trying to bring in these other factors to allow people to see that, there's multiple issues going on here. This isn't a kind of, we should not just throw this Islamic label on this and just say, well, this is part of the religion. It's much deeper. It's much deeper than that.
Yeah. One of the things in the book that I thought was really interesting, well, I've learned a lot from it, and I thought it was like a kind of ingenious, I don't know, approach or strategy, is you talk about, you compare the prophet with George Washington, and specifically, I forget the name of the book now. I thought I was going to remember it, but it's like proper manners or proper etiquette or something, or
rules of civility. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you have this really interesting like dialogue between not between, but we're kind of like looking at these two individuals and their corpus, so to speak. And that was like and kind of based around the idea of the golden rule. And where did that come from? And maybe you can first tell the audience a bit about the George Washington side of it and what this little book was, and then how you came up with this idea.
Yeah. Thank you for that. That really kind of makes me reflect back on my early days in researching this stuff. So when I was 18, I actually went to college to play basketball, and that didn't work out. And when I transferred to AU in DC, the Iraq War had just started, and I was really passionate for whatever reason. I really couldn't tell you what initiated this, but I was very interested in this kind of civic notion of American national identity. Obviously it's very romanticized and it's very idealized, but I really felt passionately about this idea that what it means to belong to this country is the opposite of ethnocentrism, of racial supremacy. If we just look at the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident. All human beings are created equal, that they're endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. So like, I was interested in the vision of the Founding Fathers and this civic notion towards American identity. So I started reading a lot about this generation. So reading Benjamin Franklin's autobiography, reading Washington's Crossing by David McCollum, reading a bunch of different books throughout history. And I stumbled on The Rules of Civility, which is a book that Washington wrote when he was a youngish man. And in essence, it was a book that provided him with a kind of compass to navigate his social circles. He was obviously, I think, an aristocrat in a way. He was elite, I think, in many ways, but he was providing readers with a code of conduct, a moral code of conduct. So I read it, and again, for whatever reason, I can't remember why I did this, but I think at the time I was also studying some features of, traditional features of the Islamic faith, and I was coming across even things like cleanliness. And then I had read a whole section in Rules of Civility on Washington talking about the importance of cleanliness, and I was like, that's just interesting. And then I just kept reading and finding these connections, and I actually published it originally in the Huffington Post. And that was the first article that I think was called An Unlikely Connection Between Prophet Muhammad and George Washington. And that was the first article that the Islamophobia industry, if you want to, whatever you want to call it, picked up on my work. And Fox News blasted it on their website saying look at this. They were just like, how can anyone compare Muhammad with Washington? And to be fair, a lot of Muslims were not happy about that either, this argument that I was bringing him down, which is not my intention. I was trying to make a parallel between civilizations, between religions. So it's a good book, Rules of Civility. Gives us some guidance, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I know a little bit what it's like to kind of be attacked. And I don't like it. I mean, I have to say, it's exhausting, and it's, I think that there's people who are really tough and kind of strong, and sure, if this stuff just washes off them, or rolls off them. But for me, it's very stressful and hurtful. Yeah. And I mean, but I don't think I get anywhere near what you get. So how do you deal with that? What's it like? What as an experience?
Well, I try to be that person that you described first, the in one ear, out the other. I was kind of raised that way. My parents always kind of taught me, you have to be a little tough in this world. There's going to be people who disagree with you. Having thick skin sometimes is okay. I was raised that way. I don't know if that's a product of being from Boston or from being Irish. I don't know. But my dad was also in the military, and that's how I was kind of raised, follow your passion. If you're passionate about something and you really love it and you're in it for the right reasons, then why would all of these kind of outside comments and noise, why would it deter you? I tried to do that, but it's hard, it's absolutely hard. Recently, I kind of had a rough 3-4 days over the Hagia Sophia issue. So I put up a tweet and I said I was disappointed about the decision to turn the Hagia Sophia into what it now is. I mean, it's still partially a museum, but the only people who are praying there are now Muslims. And I said I would have preferred it to remain a secular museum, or what I really advocated for is finding a way to almost demarcate this building so Christians and Muslims can pray according to their traditions and to their
the Holy Sepulchre Church or something.
Exactly, and using it as a space to explore possibilities. What could these two communities do in a space like this? And I was absolutely destroyed. People were like, I always knew you had an agenda. I always knew you weren't friends of Muslims, and you're doing all this for attention and money. I mean, that's the stuff I think that bothers me most, is when people question my intention, because I know my intention, and I'm so immersed in this stuff, and I live it and I love it. So when people are questioning that, I think that's difficult. When people question an article I wrote, or, a bad review of a book, I mean, you're going to have those critics, but it was tough. I'm not going to lie. It was tough. And, but again, it was a good learning experience for me as well. And I think what disappointed me was just some serious backlash, largely from Pakistanis and Turks. That's where I got a lot of the
Yeah,
stuff.
it's
So
unfortunate. I mean, like, of all the, I mean, of all the things to kind of attack someone over, that just strikes me as being really, I mean, completely marginal. I mean, look, what do you, you're going to have your opinion. I mean, what is that opinion so surprising? Is it so shocking that you would have that opinion? And are
yeah,
you undermining anybody? Are you trying to hurt anybody? No, I mean, this is,
yeah,
yeah, to sort of, I mean, in some ways it stinks of kind of the idea that you could be like your own person, right? You sort of exist to,
yeah,
that
exactly.
you exist to sort of be this sort of walking
Token.
massage, ego massage or something,
Yeah,
and that, of course, but I mean, of all the opinions you could say that would be quote unquote attacking them, this is so mild. So,
yeah, it is.
um,
I appreciate that, like because that's what I felt, like I felt like, you know, I like stepped outside like a boundary that like people didn't want me to step outside of. And I felt like I couldn't be myself really. So I appreciate what you said. I feel like that you captured it actually better than I did.
no, I doubt that. But I mean, I think part of it, this idea of not being able to be yourself is, it's an interesting conclusion because, your path strikes me as, I mean, you didn't have to, you didn't have to do this, right? I mean, I don't think anybody wakes up in the morning and says, "Hey, I have a really good, career plan.
Yeah,
I'm going to go
exactly.
and,
Yeah.
do this," right? I mean, and it's gutsy. I think it's really gutsy.
And
And
another
I mean,
thing,
as you
Jonathan,
write, the stuff I've read by you, you're really open about what you believe. You're really open about why you believe it.
mhm,
You don't be like playing any, deceiving anybody or kind of preserving some kind of strategic ambiguity. I mean, you're very open about everything. And like that, if people value that, let's say if Muslims value that, right, which I think they do, I do, then they have to accept that that's who you are. Like, you're a person who's not to, but what I find interesting is you're very polite. Like, there's a lot of people who, are always themselves, and that means they're kind of abrasive and caustic, and but you're not that kind of person. I mean, that
yeah.
strikes me as, if there's anybody who's going to be themselves, I would like it to be somebody like you, and not, somebody like me or something, always offending people and stuff. So, yeah, I anyway, thought that was an interesting experience to hear about. The one thing I was, when I was reading the book, and you were talking about, you talked about jihad, and I think a lot of the material in there, Muslims are aware of these sort of different nodes of discussion. Um, but one thing that I was thinking about was the idea of kind of just war theory, Catholic just war theory, and I remember an experience I had. I can't stand it when interviewers like start talking about themselves, but the only reason I'm doing this is because I think it's useful. Is I remember I was teaching in Seattle at the University of Washington. I somehow got like roped into talking to a third grade class. It was really nice, actually. I wish I had done that more often. I was like talking to these third graders, and I have like no nieces or nephews. I have no cousin, or now I have nieces and nephews, but I mean, I have zero experience with kids, like absolutely none, And so I had no idea. And so they were asking me, they're like, well, why? And this is probably like 2007 or something. So 9/11 and stuff was still pretty fresh. And so why are Muslims violent? Like, why is Islam violent and stuff? And I just asked, I said, well, okay, why do you think, when do you think it's okay to fight? When do you think it's okay to fight? And they were like, if you're being attacked, if you see someone being hurt, I was like, well, that's actually like pretty Quranic. Like, these are, if you read the Quran, you would probably walk away with these different, self-defense. You're driven from your home. You can fight to get your home back. You can fight to prevent people from being persecuted, right? You can fight if you're being persecuted. So, and what was really interesting is the students, these third graders, were like, yeah, that's actually, I realized that I thought that this was like a real point of confluence between these young little Americans and, this guy talking about Islam. And so when you talk to people um, about jihad or violence in Islam, war in Islam, do you ever think about Western or Catholic or Christian theories about just war and violence?
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily be someone that could tell you too much about just war theory, but I will say this: in situations like this where jihad gets brought up, again, my kind of go-to is to give a personal example that means something to me, that is linked to me somehow, to try to kind of make something relatable. So one example that I actually use, and I actually go back to the Irish context, which kind of overlaps with the Catholic context, but where my family is from in West Clare, during the night, around World War One, you had a paramilitary organization called the Black and Tans, and the Black and Tans were, in short, not a great group of dudes at all. And they were going around villages, and they were knocking on people's doors and just being very disruptive. I mean, not kind of too dissimilar to unfortunate scenes we see around the world with other forms of occupation. Just these police officers basically just doing whatever they want, and that's not right. Taking things that aren't yours, creating chaos in local communities that don't deserve to be treated this way. So I had and I just learned about this summer. I had a great uncle named Michael Considine, and he joined the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, in 1921 because of these Black and Tan knocks on the doors. And they were, we're not talking killing people on a mass scale. It's like it was a guerrilla war, but like one or two
Yeah.
people are killed in a
Did you,
small
if you're,
village.
I think it's sort of a lot like the Palestinians. I mean, if anyone
It
wants to
is.
watch a movie about that's sort of like, it's called The Wind That Shakes the Barley. I mean,
Ah,
don't, your kids shouldn't be around for it, but I mean, it's a really like traumatic
how did you
film. I think it
find that,
has,
Jonathan? How did you find that movie? Because that's like my favorite movie.
um, my Palestinian in-laws, my father-in-law made me watch it. I mean, it's really painful to watch, but I mean, this is,
Yeah.
it was actually really, I'll like tell a short story, but it was really interesting when I was, I grew up like very kind of Anglophilic family. Like my mom did her PhD in Cambridge, my grandmother did her PhD in Oxford, my aunt did her MA in Oxford, et cetera, et cetera. We got all this like chuck and die stuff around our house growing up, and and then we were watching one day. I remember it was my Palestinian in-laws, my father-in-law. We were watching the James Bond movie Skyfall, right? And there's this scene where M is like giving this speech before Parliament committee, and she starts reading this poem Ulysses about like it's just rumination on how great Britain is, even though it's not great anymore in effect. And the being intercut with like James Bond running after the bad guy, and the music is swelling, and I remember being like, oh, I was like, oh, it's emotionally moving, kind of. And then my father-in-law just says like, "Wallahi al English dol kilab," right? Which means like those English people are dogs. Like it's just it's just so, because the experience of like Irish of colonized people is so different than the experience of people who are just come from the side of the colonizer, right? Or
Yeah.
the mainstream culture. And I like that once you're once you do things like you watch a movie like that or you learn about this stuff, it just your whole world just turns over, and suddenly every movie you ever watched, the bad guys are now the good guys, the good guys are now the bad guys, with the exception oddly of things like American Revolution movies where the British are the bad guys, but then in every other movie they're the good guys.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was like,
Interesting.
it was yeah, The Wind That Shakes the Barley. I really recommend watching it, although it's like
Definitely.
it's a traumatic, it's not a movie
Yeah.
that you'll stop thinking about.
So with this
Um,
Mike, let me finish
yeah.
with Mike Considine. Like, so yeah, he joins the IRA, which today I think this government still considers the IRA to be a terrorist organization. I'm not sure, but I mean, would you blame someone for taking that position? You know, I mean, people are coming around, knocking on your door and killing people. I mean, talk about just war. I mean, that seems just to me. And then, Jonathan, if you don't mind, I'd like to make a quick connection too with the Ireland Palestine thing. And living there in Ireland was liberating for me, because the Israeli-Palestinian issue was something I studied in college and something that I've always been passionate about. But I felt like I couldn't really talk about it here for a lot of different reasons. But in Ireland, it was a completely different ballgame. And when I was there and I was able to dig back into my own family history, I got into land records. And around the Irish famine, quote, Irish famine, we were getting land taken from us. We had, the house is still there in Lisdoon Varna. It's a very, very humble house. You know, they had like one cow and so on and so forth. So it's an issue of land, you know, like when people think about, oh, Israel, Palestine, Jews, Muslims have always been fighting. No, it's, you know, one of the main issues, if not the main issue, it's land. People taking your land. What are you supposed to do? Just roll over, you know? And then another good movie, Jonathan, I don't know if you've seen 1847. This came out about a year and a half, 2 years ago. And 1847 is the height of the Irish famine. And earlier I put famine in quotes because there's a significant body of literature too, academic studies, that have basically revealed in many ways that this famine was not a natural famine, that Ireland and these major cities were pumping out tons of food and tons of resources. But the landowners, who happened to be British and Protestant, had to make their money, and they were essentially letting people starve to death. So 1847 is it's a pretty rough watch as well, but, you know, very relevant to what's happening today.
There's one question, and by the way, you all should ask your questions, otherwise I'm just going to keep blabbering.
And collecting some of the questions as well.
So one person asks, do you have any books you'd recommend to gain better understanding of the Irish history and conflict?
In this country, the best book is actually pretty old at this point, but Michael Ignatieff in 1993 wrote a book called How the Irish Became White. Oh, and yeah. That's a really good book for understanding the U.S. Irish lived experience. Really interesting parallels. Like, I think Ignatieff, I can't remember if he focuses on this specifically, but you know, Frederick Douglass, one of the arguably one of the most important Americans to have ever lived, actually sailed over to Ireland in a kind of a spirit of anti-racism and racial equality. And the Irish were like, this is great because we're othered as a different race being Irish. And then it wasn't until the Irish came to America where they learned about this form of like racial superiority or racism. The Irish context I'd be less familiar with, but there is a Oxford history book. I believe it's by Turner, but it was written in the 80s. It's still my favorite. It's a bit outdated. But if you're really interested in a very critical race theory approach to Irish identity, one of my supervisors at Trinity College is a woman named Ronit Lenton. And she is an inspiring person. And she was born in Haifa, I believe, and then migrated to Dublin and had a huge impact in the Irish Palestine Solidarity Campaign and still does to this day. Her name is Ronit Lenton. She's a tough cookie.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Another question that was asked was, this is for Dr. Considine. You had a great section in your text on Rumi and Emerson. Can you comment on the similarities you drew?
Yeah, this was coming out of this period where I was just blogging for the Huffington Post back when the Huffington Post was awesome and they were actually allowing random people like me to kind of submit random articles. like Washington and Muhammad. Like who would think? But one of them I submitted was, yeah, Rumi and Emerson. Growing up in Boston, like every time I went home for the summer, I would pick either like a Emerson or Thoreau book, and I would just go into the woods and I would just sit there for 3 hours just reading this stuff. You know, there's something different, like when you have a philosopher like Emerson and he's writing from where you're from, and you read the books in the spaces that he was also immersing himself in. I don't know. I thought it was like some type of deeper connection. But Emerson was a transcendentalist, you know, really pushing the boundary of what it meant to be a Christian living in Boston in the early 19th century. And he also did a fantastic job of relating Christianity to other religious traditions, not just Islam either, like Hinduism, Buddhism, and all on down the line. And he also spoke so much about love and a kind of a radical love for God's creation, not just human beings and, you know, embracing difference, but like everything, nature, birds, you know, a really kind of comprehensive embrace of humanity. And I was more familiar with Rumi because of college and the studies that I did under Professor Ahmed. And when I started reading Emerson, a light bulb kind of went off, and I said, actually, these two people are really there's some striking similarities here. And like even like if you actually read the book, it's almost like the quotes from Rumi and Emerson are like mirror images of each other. It's like scary close, which is pretty interesting. So I like to match up people like that in history. Like I know it's you know, a lot of people don't like that approach. They say, well, you're comparing two different times. But when we match up two people like this, it bridges a lot of different gaps. Like it's not just about, you know, Westerners and the so-called Muslim world or Islam and Christianity. It's even deeper than that. It's poets, it's philosophers, and I just find it really inspiring.
The one question is about kind of how to engage Southern Baptist church members and evangelical Christians in the U.S.
Oof. I must say that I've been blessed in the last year to have befriended Pastor Bob Roberts. And Bob Roberts is a good friend of Imam Magid based in DC. I believe Imam Magid's in DC, yeah. Mm-hmm. And Bob is, you know, very inspiring for me. When he tells his story about, you know, standing up for what is right, what is righteous, truthful, and just in defense of his Muslim friends and neighbors, and even the people who happen to be Muslim that he doesn't know. He thought, for whatever reason, his calling as a Christian at that point in time, I think it was around the Muslim ban, he said, I have to do something. And he took a stand in front of his massive church community, and he lost a lot of people. He lost a lot of resources. So I look up to him as a kind of inspiration, not only in terms of, you know, using our own faith traditions as inspirations to build these bridges of understanding, but like even more deeply, like being bold with the positions that you take, you know. And how easy would it have been if, you know, Bob just sat back and didn't say anything? Things would have just continued for him as they were, but he really, he took a stand. I do think that, and maybe I'm being naive and I'm just an eternal optimist, but I do believe in the genuine goodness of people. I think there's goodness in all of us. And with evangelicals, my experience with them, you know, and I'm not trying to denigrate them or belittle them, but a lot of it is rooted in terms of their perception of Muslims and Islam. It's just rooted in incorrect information. And I don't really think that most of it is this deep-seated, you know, hatred for a faith. Maybe it is, but even if that is the case, they just don't know, you know, they haven't met people. They haven't visited a mosque. Not that these things cure everything, you know, but again, trying to just chip away at that unfamiliarity that a lot of people have. encouraging people to go out and have human interactions with people. This is a good way to build bridges.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I just had a question for both of you that I got. And the question was, who are some current peacemakers that you both look up to?
Do we both have to look up to them, or
no, like individual answers?
we have to discuss that beforehand. I don't know. I don't know. Go ahead, Dr.
I would
Craig.
say, I think it's difficult to actually define like who a peacemaker is in this day and age, because it feels like it's really difficult to actually make and actualize peace, and I feel like some of the best peacemakers may not necessarily be the people who are getting their hands necessarily dirty, and like really kind of going out into spaces to try to build bridges. I mean, those people exist, but I wish I knew more of them. I will say that, Pope Francis, I would consider him to be a peacemaker, but again, not in this kind of directly hands-on approach, but when he talks about the culture of encounter, that I think inspires me, and it's rooted in some of the stuff I was recently saying. And he also comes up with the idea of overcoming the culture of indifference, this apathy. When we see people getting on a boat, risking their entire lives, getting on a raft, leaving everything behind, their families, their homes, everything, their belongings, and they just go into the Mediterranean Sea. Pope Francis is saying, like, we need to figure out a way to make that matter to us, to overcome that culture of indifference. There's something peaceful in this. And again, it's not that traditional kind of person who's signing a treaty and making peace between nations. It's not that. I find inspiration in Pope Francis in this regard.
Oh yeah, I guess two people that come to mind. One is Robert George. He's a professor at Princeton. He's a professor of, I think, law and philosophy, and he's a conservative scholar, and he's Catholic, and some people don't like him because he's not a Trump supporter, but he's conservative in the context of U.S. sort of culture wars issues, and that can be controversial. I think I've really he's one of the few kind of really respected Christian thinkers who has just that I know of who's really come out over and over again and said that Muslims are allies. Like, Muslims are people of faith in America who should be like, and this is what I've always wondered. If I were Catholic, especially, I would love Muslims. I would love Muslims because they're, in general, Muslims are, if I were a Catholic concerned about the degradation of my tradition, I would really like Muslims, because they're basically people who have not done as much compromise as a lot of the other Christian denominations. And in terms of hermeneutics, in terms of metaphysics, in terms of a lot of things, right? And I would just see them as really natural allies, and yet, there's just this huge division between, the more conservative the Christian, the less likely they are to really want to have anything to do with the Muslim, let alone see a Muslim as a fellow traveler, right, on certain path. So, he was someone who's done a lot of work kind of building relationships with Muslims and intellectual relationships, institutional relationships. And then the other one is my Omar Suleiman, who's an imam in Texas, in Dallas.
That's a good one.
And I think he's like 10 years younger than me or something, but he's a lot more mature than I am. So I always think of him as being older than me. But, he's someone who is a really sincere person, and I've been impressed by the way he's put himself out there for a lot of on a lot of issues of social justice, and works with other communities, but doesn't kind of compromise his beliefs as a Muslim. That's a very hard thing to do, and that I really respect. And he works hard. One of the things I realize is that people who do this kind of stuff, like they put an enormous amount of time and energy into it. I mean, it's exhausting to even watch them go through their schedule.
I remember seeing him at the ISNA convention in Houston, and he had like 3 armed police officers like walking with him. I mean, think about that. Yeah. That's the it's not, you're not paying a price for that, but like that's what you get when you're involved in this type of peacemaking work. There's also someone I wanted to bring up, and it's kind of going back to who is a peacemaker and how do we evaluate them today. So I was able to meet a man named Abu Bakr Abdullahi, and he is from a small village, and I'm forgetting the name, in Nigeria, in these communities where Christian and Muslim violence is very, very real. And Imam Abu Bakr was at his mosque one day, and the way that the news stories reported this was that a militia of people who happened to be Muslims were like pushing Christians out of a village, and these Christians are running towards the mosque, and Imam Abu Bakr opened the door and hid them, and he put his entire life on the line, his congregation on the line, and he saved like 300 people. So like you have people that dedicate their life to peacemaking, and I totally second Imam Omar Suleiman. But then you have someone like Imam Abu Bakr Abdullahi in one day saving 300 people who happen to be Christian. I mean, that's remarkable. Like I would die a happy man tomorrow if I had the opportunity to do that for someone. I mean, that's just that's amazing. I mean, imagine the courage that you have to do something like that. It's remarkable.
Yeah.
Dr. Brown, this was the question for you. As a Muslim professor at a Catholic university, how has Dr. Considine's message, book, and role impacted how you have viewed Christians?
Well, I mean, I think in some ways I'm the bad person to ask that question to, unfortunately, in the sense that we at Georgetown, there's been since I think 2002 or something, I can't remember when it started, an initiative called Building Bridges. And I'm surprised, Craig, that you, maybe they've contacted you, but I'm surprised.
The Bridge Initiative?
No, Bridge Initiative is for Islamophobia. That's also at Georgetown. That's only a few years old. But this is called Building Bridges. It was basically started by the Archbishop of Canterbury, and then I think it was Rowan Williams. Is that? And then at Georgetown and someone else, I can't remember. It was sort of a group of people, and they basically every year Muslim scholars and Christian scholars get together and read each other's scripture together, and then they have these like retreats for about 3 or 4 days, and actually 4 or 5 days actually, and you get to know each other really well, and it's really rewarding. I mean, you learn academically, intellectually, it's really interesting. Personally, it's really interesting. So I've had this perspective, this idea of engagement is something that Georgetown takes really seriously, and takes it seriously as an intellectual endeavor, but also as to build those relationships and understand that you need to be able to try and prevent or stem the kind of conflict that we see around us. So, I mean, I think that, Craig's probably taking this sort of engagement to a wider audience, right? Outside of the little egghead bubble that we live in. But I think, Georgetown's an interesting place. Hey, Mazen. In that it's not a very Catholic school. I mean, I shouldn't say that. Okay. I mean, there's a spectrum of Catholic schools. It's not on the right end of the spectrum, right? It's on the left end of the spectrum. Mazin Salam Nas. This is Mazin Amin. So
Hey.
so basically, it's like you could be at Georgetown and maybe not even know you were at a Catholic university. But one of the things that I think does consistently present, and you really appreciate this when you're someone doing like work on religion and stuff, is that religion is taken seriously. There's a lot of, you read these articles about, some super liberal college or university where, somebody says something religious, and the next thing you know, they're something's happening to them, or they're alienated or something. And that doesn't happen at Georgetown. There's always a space for people who want to talk about religion seriously, and I think that's healthy.
This is another question for. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just gonna say I wish I had that here at Rice. Like, there's the religion scene is not very big, and like even bringing up religion in like class is like taboo. So I'm like, oh God.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I think it's weird, like that's
it's tough.
It's unfortunate that the kind of conservative right wing or whatever Republican talking points about universities are unfortunately often true. Like, you're like, you wish sometimes you hear about these experiences. It's almost like someone wrote it in some right wing, like fantasy or something. And you're like, wow, you guys really shouldn't be this on the nose. But yeah, it's unfortunate.
It is.
The other question posed to both of you is, what role has your faith played during the current quarantine, and how have you reacted to it?
Wow.
Go ahead.
I can't say it's been that different from ordinary times. In ordinary times, well, I guess this is the new ordinary, but just finding solace and inspiration in texts, I think that is something that continues to inspire me. So just kind of the basics of finding moral guidance. But I did give a couple talks, and I think I blogged about it a couple times. If we were to look at the historical Jesus, at least in my eyes and in my view, Jesus of the gospel, Jesus of Nazareth, was someone who was, fundamentally concerned with the well-being of all people, but especially the people who are more vulnerable and the people who are kind of on the periphery of society. That's the Jesus that inspires me. Jesus of Nazareth, not necessarily the Jesus of Christianity, is a different ballgame. So when we start thinking about, wearing a mask, wearing a mask could potentially stop the spread, save a life. Doing easy things like this to, in a way, it's an easy way to follow Jesus's teaching. Just care for one another, do the right thing, look out for one another. So basic things like that. I mean, I think those are the things that are popping up into my head during COVID, and then also not being able to go to mass. So one thing that has been rough for Miriam and I, we moved away from downtown Houston before the pandemic started, and we don't have a church anymore. And I actually called the only Catholic church where we live. It's a pretty rural area, and they haven't even messaged me back. And I'm trying to figure out how to get my baby girl, Clarabella, baptized. So at the moment, I'm unchurched, but I think generally speaking, I'm probably unchurched permanently because of a lot of my views. Like I take issue, as I mentioned, I love Francis, but I take issue with the Catholic Church, some of their rules. So there's that as well, kind of in this in-between phase that so many people are in right now. You feel completely disoriented. I don't know where to go to mass and all that stuff.
Is my computer? Can you guys hear me? Oh yeah. So basically, like, I don't know. For me, I mean, I've been trying to pray more, but I always seem to fail doing that. I read Quran more. I tried to like have more of a routine. I guess it's nice that I don't have to like commute. But I think for me the biggest thing has just been like kind of reconnecting with like the presence of death and just like we're used to living lives where nothing, disease and things like that are really not supposed to be part of your life, which I think is horribly problematic for a lot of reasons. Like I'm not saying that's a good way to live at all. But I think that this is like just to really just remember how vulnerable we are as God's creatures, how dependent we are, how much we need to be ready to undergo loss.
That's powerful. And like, if I can piggyback on that too, like the interconnectedness of us all and everything on Earth, something that something that evolves out of a country on the other side of the planet can impact us, and it's invisible. I mean, how powerful is our Creator? It's almost humbling in a lot of ways, and I think, Jonathan, that's a powerful point. Thinking about the presence of death, how vulnerable we are, how everything can basically just stop, and we're at the mercy of something that, is invisible. I hate to use the word that Trump uses, but the invisible disease or whatever. But I mean, it is true. I mean, think about that. The coronavirus did what some crazy dictators around the world would love to pull off. Just this like complete chaos, shutdown, markets are in turmoil, and so on and so forth. So I pray and I hope that God has, and He does, has a plan for all of us here. And hopefully we come out soon, closer to the light.
We have just a few more questions, and one of them for Dr. Considine is, what do you think are the deepest similarities between Catholicism and Islam?
Oh, wow. I think this is going to be a boring answer. I'll try to make it interesting. Monotheism, the belief in one creator, in one God. I am moved, and I've always been inspired by the amount of time and energy that Muslims put into charity, which is something, when I grew up in the Catholic Church, this was always something that, was a fundamental part of our experience. Giving to those in need for no other reason outside of understanding that these are our fellow human beings and they need our attention. Not doing it for any self-serving purpose, not doing it so you can have a brick on a church and your family's name can be there as someone who donated. So I'm inspired by the charity. I'm also inspired by, I'm kind of talking on the pillars here, but like I'm also inspired by the commitment to prayer. The commitment to prayer is something that I witnessed when I was a kid with my Nana, Angie Tedesco, on the Italian side. And every Sunday when I was over there, she's in her rocking chair and I'm sitting down eating raviolis or whatever I was eating. And she would just sit there and say the rosary. And I forget how long it took her, but I would try to interrupt her and ask her various questions. And there was no way of kind of breaking that mode. So yeah, kind of larger theological things, monotheism, belief in prophets, belief in the day of judgment, other themes like compassion and mercy, charity, faith, prayer. I mean, you can see why I engage in the work that I do, because I see a ton of similarities.
Well, it's kind of, it's an interesting question, because it's sort of hard to, you mean someone who I know is Christian or someone who kind of really talks a lot about being Christian. I mean, because I have a lot of friends who are Christian. I know that's important to them, but it's not really the axis of our relationship in any way. I'd say that the guy probably it was a guy named Jim Wellman, James Wellman. He's a professor at University of Washington. He writes actually books on American evangelicals. I think he's Presbyterian, and he's like a minister in the Presbyterian Church. And I remember we traveled. My first thing I did at University of Washington when I joined, we went on a trip to Uzbekistan, and Jim Wellman and I like ended up traveling a bunch. And he's he's a guy who takes religion seriously, and as Craig knows, like especially in like a liberal place like Seattle, just having colleagues who are religious, it doesn't actually matter what their religion is. Like, it's sort of, you have these like weird little fraternities that are built up. Like there's like one Orthodox Jew and like a Muslim and like a Christian, and they hang out with each other because they're the only ones who can, they all feel like they're being besieged. So I think that's that guy, just that experience of kind of having lunch with him, and we almost never, we were never talking as like Muslims and Christians. We were always talking about people who were religious and trying to deal with that in kind of an urban liberal American setting.
The same question for you, Dr. Considine.
I knew this was going to be the question. As I was attentively listening to Jonathan, I was also trying to think in the back of my head who I should pick, and it's really, really difficult. And Jonathan raises points that I also feel as well. Like there are friends that are kind of more religious, maybe in terms of practicing or being a bit more rigid, and I mean that in a good way. And then there are people who like are a little away from the mainstream, kind of on the periphery, and it's different as well. But in terms of actually naming one, I really don't know if I could, but I think to bring it all full circle, I would probably have to go back with Professor Ahmed, for me personally, because he had the ability, he happened to be Muslim, and our connection happened to be Christian-Muslim relations and Islam, but he gave me the invaluable gift of this love of knowledge, of learning, and in all the forms that it comes in, whether it's books and theories, but also in human interactions. And, I'm forever indebted to him. And he was doing it because he was inspired to do so by his faith and in his belief of, Muhammad's character and conduct. So for me, there are very few other amazing role models for me. I mean, he changed my trajectory, focusing on love of knowledge. So I would have to give a shout out to Professor Ahmed, but there's so many more.
Well, we would like to again thank our guests tonight, Dr. Jonathan Brown and Dr. Craig Considine. Thank you so much for your conversation and for joining us and making time out of your days and lives to talk to us. We would like to make a few announcements about our upcoming events. As you can see here, we'll be having our first ever virtual concert titled Awakenings on Saturday, November 14th, and you can visit the Risala Facebook page for more information. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Pleasure.
Yeah, Craig, I will email you, so we'll be in touch. We will continue discussing everything. Nice. Thanks, everybody. Lovely. It was a wonderful experience. Thanks,
everyone. It was awesome. Thanks, Risala, and thanks, Saman. Thank you.
No problem.
Bye.